Okay, this is the first time I'm doing a dual here online and in person, so bear with me. And the speakers today, next up, you were gonna do that? That's no worries. Start recording session, all right. This I know what to do with, okay. Aloha and welcome. I am thrilled to be here. I am not as Blank Monica, yeah. If you wanna find me on social, it's not as Blank. I'm Monica Sandberg, but everybody knows me as not as Blank. And I'm an AsureTech innovator, architect, admin, and Salesforce MVP. And I've spoken at Automation Hour 4 times. And I've also spoken at Dreamforce, and I've spoken at Trailhead DX, and many, many Dream and events. And I tell you that not to brag. What that's about is that anyone, all of us can do that. And we all have something to share, and we all have expertise. So I encourage you all to put your hand up and start speaking at events, because the way to learn is to teach. Absolutely the best way to learn. So one of the things that I always start with is people think the person in the front of the room has all the answers. I don't have all the answers. Salesforce doesn't have all the answers. I've met many of the architects that have written all the books and all the coding books and all the things that you guys read. They don't have all the answers. So don't get discouraged if you don't have all the answers. What you do need as an architect is questions. Questions. Lots and lots and lots of questions. And the questions are the key to success. So what we're going to talk about today, and I have questions. I'm bringing you questions today because there's things that I've thought about and things that I've made decisions about. And as an architect, you make decisions and you try to have as much to back those decisions, but there is no one way to do everything. So we're making decisions, there's always trade-offs. And today we're going to talk about trade-offs, and we're going to talk about architecting record trigger flows. Now, I'm not talking about the minutia inside record trigger flows of how you do an element and all of that. We're talking about the overarching architecture of how are you going to build your flows in the first place, and we're going to get more into that. And we're going to do discussions today. So I'm going to present some material, and then I'm going to open to discussion. We're going to have to time them to about 5 minutes each one. So please bear with me and hold questions and comments until the discussion. Okay, so this session is inspired by this. I made this, they did a set, this is Salesforce with their answer to how to create record trigger flows. And they did a session, and they did it again at Dreamforce, and they showed you 3 design patterns. And I realized I don't use any of those 3. Is that a bad thing or is that a good thing? I think that's a good thing, because that means that we all have different orgs. We all have different teams. Some are developer heavy, some are single admin, just an admin. Some have architects, some have CTOs. We have different teams. We have different orgs. We have different data models. We have in different orgs, different amount of data, right? And so the choices that one person makes doesn't mean that's a choice you make. But what we want to do are ask questions and come to a decision for our org, the right design strategy, and stick with it. You don't want to just create a flow this way one day, and I'm gonna do subflows over here tomorrow. Now the next time I'm gonna do this totally different design pattern. That's not an architect's role. Architect's role is to guide the org. So we're going to talk about these 3, and then I'm going to show you mine. We're going to have discussions, and then I'd love to hear other people's strategy for record trigger flows. So in case, I know we have different levels of knowledge here, and this is Salesforce's architect.salesforce.com, their thoughts on record trigger flow. They've done testing, they offer guidance, they give you a lot of information here. This is not etched in stone. When I remember I said Salesforce doesn't have all the answers, their best practice has changed multiple times. this document changes multiple times since I've been reading this document. So it's something though that you want to be aware of, and then you want to read and understand what Salesforce is saying of how the automation works. We need to know how it works before we build. So for some people, I just want to get terminology out of the way. We are going to talk about before save flow triggers. And for those of you that are not familiar or not a developer, which I'm not a developer, but I use the term before save. In Salesforce, they changed it. This is Salesforce. They've changed it to fast field updates. So when you're in Flow Builder, it's a fast field update. But really, just for our terminology here, it's a before save trigger. And so why do I say it's a before save trigger? Because this is another thing we need to understand before we build, is the order of execution. What happens in a transaction when Salesforce, when a user clicks save, or you upload information data loader or any other way, what does Salesforce do behind the scenes in that transaction? This is huge. If you don't understand this, you might be building your flows not the most optimal way. So when I say before save, for future reference, when we're talking about design, it's right up here. I can't even read. It's number 3. Okay. Salesforce actually saves a record, number 7. So that's why it's called a before save flow trigger. What happened? Oh, online. Okay. All right, now we're sharing online. I apologize, but I think you got the gist of it. But here is actually the graphic. Okay. So now I want to get the terminology right before we go forward. After save flow trigger. Salesforce, when you're in Flow Builder, they call it actions and related records. But really, it's an after save trigger. And again, here we are. And even here, they don't say, they call it, Salesforce themselves call it an after save trigger. And you see, save is number 7. So number 14 is when that part of the flow fires. So what is the implication of this? Well, it can affect how fast a record saves. It can affect whether or not, like if you get errors and your data is not turning out the way you think and it's getting overwritten because something could be in the other order. You could have another flow firing after your before save that undoes everything you did in your before save. This is why you need to understand this before you start building flows, record trigger flows. So these are the 3 types of designs that Salesforce brought up in that original blog article. And they said, okay, 3 ways you could design your flows. You could either put everything on one flow per object. So that would mean account, just one flow. Or you can have one flow per object, but use a trigger handler class pattern with subflows. Or you could just build flows as you need them. Honestly, Salesforce seems to be leaning this way with the multiple flows. But let's talk about it. That's why we're architects. Okay. If I were to do one record trigger flow, and this was presented as one of the options. In order to do that, you have to use an after save. This is why I introduced after save before, because you have some things that aren't available in before save. You can't do something from account to opportunity or anything like that. You can't do cross object or anything. So in this presentation, they said, anything you need, anything you want to do, just pile it all into one flow. So what we're talking about as architects is there's always trade-offs. And one of the problems is you're only using an after save instead of taking advantage of before save. But there are for me, there are other reasons why. Now, most of these I'm open to. This one, for me, I'm just giving you my 2 cents. Why is this a deal breaker for me? I've got some deal breakers. Aside from the fact that one flow, so my philosophy is in architecture, you never build for today. You have a use case and you say, I have a simple use case. All I need to do is change the stage on account. Woo, no big deal. When a user goes to this stage, I need this to happen. Okay, what about tomorrow and the next day, a year from now, 2 years from now, 4 years from now? What if your data volume increases? What if your company's bought out, like what happened to me and a bigger company, umbrella company? What if there's so many things that can change? Business use cases change all the time. So how, when you're doing your architecture, you should never think for today. Tell me about that with all my workflow rules from 10 years ago, okay? So you just have to forward think. What if, what if? One of my what ifs is that I personally, this is part of my thing, is I build bypasses into all of my flows. I do not build a flow without a bypass. Why do I do that? What I mean by bypass is that I don't have to go to activate and deactivate to turn off a flow. So I use custom settings and I can turn off every record trigger flow in my org with one checkbox. I can turn off every single flow on the account object with one checkbox. I can turn off a flow individually, just one at a time by using an automation number. I can turn off a flow for a certain user because by definition, record trigger flows work for all users. You may not want that to happen. So it's not that I know I need this the minute I build my flow. I might need this. I'll give you a good example. I had to upload a whole bunch of data. It was unexpected. This data was really a mess. I mean, very, very bad data. Sometimes that happens, you come from a trade show or something. If I were to let all my record trigger flows run, my validation rules are going to stop it. I'm going to have all kinds of problems. I could trigger emails that shouldn't go out, all of these things. So what did I do? I turned it off with my custom setting, did my upload, turned it back on. So my deal breaker with one flow is what's the point of turning off one giant flow that does everything when I only need to turn off maybe the actions that are sending an email or maybe it's certain flows and leave the others running. So that's, I'm thinking in the future, always when I'm building. So for me, one flow for me is a deal breaker, but I know some people are doing it and it works great for them. Okay, so now we're going to open discussion. And maybe I got this wrong on the one flow. I would love to hear, because in certain orgs, again, what I said, if you're a solo admin, you have a very simple org, you don't have much data, it's possible that the one flow per object would work for you. So let's open up discussion on this design pattern. What are your thoughts?
It's really quick, Monica, because we surveyed everybody that signed up before, and so one flow per object. We had 20 people that selected that out of 116.
That's great.
And 10 of them had, 4 of them had built more than 10 flows, 5 to 10 were 5, and then 11 less than 5. That way you know that's what everybody.
Yeah, so every architect is there. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I said for me, it doesn't work. Does anybody in here have an opinion about building all of your flows this way with one flow? Yeah.
We specifically don't, because we have 7 admins, and the distribution of work. I need you to do this, you do this, you do this, so that
That's a perfect reason why it might not work for you. Yes.
If you lose the 4 save flow, that has the best performance gain that you get.
Absolutely, that's another thing. Yes.
I kind of do like a hybrid. I do like one before and one after for each object. That way I can.
Wait, you're jumping ahead to my. Wait, that's my design pattern. Wait a minute.
Like
No.
my reasoning for trying to keep it as like minimal amount of flows as possible is being able to control the order of execution.
Okay, yeah, we're getting to that. That's actually very close to my design strategy, which was not one of the ones that Salesforce presented. To just show there's probably 50 more that we're not going to get to of possible design strategies. And nothing is wrong. It has to be right. And as an architect, you need to justify it. Okay. Sure.
I've come behind people that have built one flow per object with zero documentation.
Oh, that's fun.
And that is,
Try to figure out what they're actually trying to do in that flow. It can be quite difficult. On the plus side, there are plus sides, is that you just have one to look at. If you get an error message, you only have one. I mean, there are pluses to it. And if you have business logic, sometimes if it's written really nicely, those flows, you can see your business logic. But these are the cons that I came up with. Business changes, you have problems. You can't change the order of execution, like slow performance, like you mentioned, because of the missing out on the before save. They're difficult to refactor. You got to take the whole big giant mess down and add stuff to it. And complex business logic can be very, very difficult. And for me, my thing was, it's all on or it's all off. So for me, because I do the bypass, then that one is a no for me. Okay, so the next pattern, I
This
think.
may sound a little nuts, but the fastest and easiest way to make
Interesting.
passive online income.
Okay. The next one I find quite interesting is still one flow, but we're now using a trigger handler class pattern. So what do I mean by that? So what they're doing is they're using one flow and they are not using entry criteria. You can't do it with this one. And you have to use an after save flow. Again, if you're doing one flow, you just have to. There's no way around it. But rather than having everything all in one flow, they're breaking it down into decisions and subflow, decision, subflow, decision, subflow, which is more like a developer pattern. And so I can understand why this one is attractive. I don't have personally, I don't have as many objections to this one. And for the people out there that might not understand a subflow, it's basically an element in your flow where you're just telling Salesforce to call another flow from the an active flow. And so you're just calling it. And so the downside is you don't know what's in that subflow. Like by looking at your flow, you're not sure exactly what it's doing. My personal, this is again a preference. Everyone has their own design. I'm just encouraging you to have a very specific design strategy. Mine is, I don't use subflows unless I can use them globally in general. There have been odd exceptions to that, but in general, I choose only to use subflows when it's something I can do globally. And believe it or not, there's a lot more you can do globally than you think you can, because you can have decisions, you can use formulas, and you can do a lot with a global subflow. So now with this strategy, I know this conversation is probably going to get a lot more interesting. Let's discuss the one per object trigger handler class pattern. What are your thoughts on this? And those are some of what I came up with as pros and cons. You still have only one flow per object. You can use your bypasses. So that works great for me because I can have a bypass on each subflow and my master flow. The teams can work independently. Easy to refactor because each subflow is its own thing. And it follows Apex design pattern. You lose, see, we talked about this, a performance sacrifice a little bit because we're on an after save. Harder to debug the errors perhaps. Here's where it gets interesting, is that you could have multiple gets and actions and not realize it because you're building each subflow separately and not realize you're duplicating the work. And you have more flows to track and maintain. And it requires opening each subflow to see actually what that subflow is doing and how it was built. Thoughts?
Okay, so in a proper trigger framework, from my perspective, which again is probably fitting, is that obviously you move all of your code into a handler class. The one thing I noticed in your flow, you still had a lot of logic in the flow itself. Okay, do this, go out, call a handler.
Yeah, it's not pure. Right. And I didn't come up with this pattern, but yeah, you still have to have the decisions. Otherwise, if you just run all the subflows.
Right. So
they're gonna run every time.
Yeah, and so you had that, I think you kind of addressed it. I mean, a lot of times when you're going through in a hands-on class, there are going to be a lot of things that you can basically get reusable or not reusable. I mean, you basically get the benefit of being able to go out and do one query one time before you do anything else. And that is there for all of your methods.
It wouldn't be in this case, right?
Exactly. So if you go through that process and make a call, you can go do a software query or to do whatever. And then you come back and it's like, okay, now you've got to go out and do it all.
And your transaction, you have no idea with all of these in one transaction, what's really gonna happen. But I know this is a popular design pattern. Anybody here using it?
And if you're in the room, it could be louder for people virtually, that'd be great.
Okay. Is anyone using this pattern for their record trigger flows? No, that's a shocker to me. Okay, I thought we were gonna have some winners on this
I
one.
did have a question though, for
Yes.
the last point, right, as a con, for difficult to reorder the elements in the logic.
Yes,
That seems a little opposite to me. I don't know. if
because it's all in one flow.
Yeah.
So let's say I need something to happen before the other thing, like in a process builder, where you say, if this is true, then this, and then if else, go down. So let's say I decide, okay, I really need it to check one of those elements first. I've got to get into that big flow and cut and paste and take that element and move it. So because it's all in one flow, you have to move the order manually, where you can't take advantage of Salesforce's reordering the flows. That's what I meant by that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So you mean the order that they run in with the.
Within the flow,
Okay.
the elements you got to move.
And Gerald from our line agrees. He says multiple subflows are hard to find because you have to hunt and peck, and painful to review. And so just want to share.
That's awesome. Okay, we're moving along here. Okay, so we have another one now. And this is really where I feel Salesforce is leaning to. Now, again, this isn't for me. But that's, again, why we're architects, right? You got to make the big decisions. So in this framework, and this design is almost anti-design. Basically, this is, you have business logic, you need a flow, build a flow. You need to build a flow, you build a flow. You need a flow, you build a flow. You build a flow, you build a flow, you build a flow. And they say, don't worry about it because you can reorder them any way you want. Okay, that's the thing. And so this is where Salesforce is really kind of nudging us, but I have some issues with this. And one of the challenges with this one, well, here, let's talk about why Salesforce likes this one, is because so many people have workflow rules, process builders, and their tool to refactor converts it 1, 1, 1, 1. So if I have 50 workflow rules, I'm going to get 50 flows. Okay. And back when I liked workflow rules, that was kind of cool. But again, this is the thing about thinking for the future. I had some addresses that when a certain contact was on my account, I needed the invoice email to be a certain thing. And that was great. I was building workflow rules, and that was great for the first 5 or 10. And then I kept finding out another one needed an invoice email, another one needed an invoice email. I ended up with like 50 of these things before you know it. Keeping track of those 50, I'm telling you. So then can you imagine that? That's one object, and then you're doing more. That's just email field, 50. Can you imagine all the other automation? So it's kind of that same idea as what I'm concerned with here. And I have another concern. And this is just me, because this is a great debate here, is that when you have so many flows, this is Salesforce's advice, which is 100% correct. You have to have really solid entry criteria, really solid. Okay. Otherwise, all your flows are going to run over each other, and they're all going to run at the same time, and you're just going to have chaos. But here's my problem with the entry criteria. And yes, it's faster. I'm giving you that when you run with entry criteria, there is an advantage. Okay. But here's my problem. How are you going to, when you have 20, 30, 50, 100, Salesforce allows you to have thousands of flows, by the way, thousands per object. I think it's 2,000 or 3,000 per object. How are you going to keep track of all this entry criteria and know that you haven't and that someone later didn't refactor and match your entry criteria? How are you going to know that another flow isn't updating the exact same field you're updating? That's my question. So you've got to have, not to say this is not an absolute, because I can do, with this pattern, I have no problem with my bypasses. And you know that's my passion. I have to have bypasses on everything. This is no problem here. I use flow templates. So every flow I create is going to be exactly the same structure because I use flow templates. But keeping track of this, not for me. Now, maybe it is for others because there are a lot of pros. Easy to refactor. You can put things in the right order. You get better performance due to entry criteria. I can use my flow bypasses. Teams can work independently. Here's my problem. Requires coordination with the entry criteria. Boy, you better have a good naming convention. I'm telling you how you keep track of all that. Extensive and accurate organization and documentation. And how do you know your business logic and what's actually happening in the life cycle of an object? And just lots of flows. But let's have a discussion here on this one, because I know a lot of people do this, and I understand why, because there's a lot of pros.
For us, we use
A little louder, I think.
sorry, for us, we use a custom entry points based off of record type, so that for every record type, we have a specific flow for it. And then there's another entry type to it, but we've had to do that to allow for all the cons on that, be able to have multiple people doing it. And
So you have very specific rules and you're adhering to a definite methodology and not just building one. Well, I like that. That makes perfect sense to me, at least. If you're just doing record type, that's a great solution.
and having multiple tech leads enforce that, because you're right, because it can go all over the place, but having that, you're going to get the call at 2:00 in the morning if this isn't correct kind of mantra on it. But
You see how that's how an architect thinks is problem solving. There's always trade-offs. There's always trade-offs, but you've chosen a way to work around one of the trade-offs. Anybody else?
I think one of the things, and there might be ways of finding it, but when you have 1,000 flows that may be working against the same object, how do you find which is the one that we need to go modify or maintain? There is no, if it's not in the name and or it's not properly documented, it takes you longer to find which one you need to modify.
And then add to that cross object, because some of those might be going to other objects. Yes.
On the pro side, though, this does map to sort of Agile pretty well because it's one user story, one flow, and
Right.
everything's self-contained.
Yes. So if you have, this is where I go to the thing about your team, right? So if you have a really big team and a very organized team and a team that is really has a methodology and has documentation and all of that, this can work quite well. But if you're a solo admin or a small team, or your team's changing all the time, which can happen, it can be tough. Yes.
I feel like I ran into this in a negative way where you had like multiple processes calling each other. So you're going like on a bunny trail trying to figure out where you end up. That's where like it started out with over there. Is you have like back when it was like workflow rules is triggering a flow, which is triggering a process builder, which is triggering another flow. And you're just like going down this line when it's really all the same business process. And it can all just be in one place, so you can easily troubleshoot it instead of having to go find all
Yes. And you brought up a good point of what if the flow is changing something that triggers another flow, that triggers another flow, that triggers another flow, and how do you maintain that and deal with this many flows?
Yeah, we kept hitting limits, and then once it was all consolidated in one flow, all of a sudden, it was a lot easier to manage, and it was also, you weren't hitting the same limits because it was only being triggered by those things that would usually be triggered all these other places were now just contained within that one process.
And
Right.
That to me is one of the things that I like about having everything in one place, is you can go, it's a I don't really know what I'm trying to say, but you have everything right there all together. So you don't have to go digging and, looking here, looking there. We trying to keep track of, I'm used to code, I
Okay.
80 lines of code at a time,
Right.
and I can pop around and that sort of thing. You don't have all the benefits that I have in IDE to be able to pop, hit the Alt B and pop over here to see exactly what the logic is. Something you do here, you set a variable, okay, where the hell's that variable?
That's
being
right.
set? It may be initialized here, modified
Mhm.
here, so on and so forth. It's difficult to keep track of all that, and so if you have it at least in one place, it's easier to follow logic.
Right. So you're leaning towards the first option on design.
I lean towards true, apex truths.
Oh, okay, so you're second option. At the end, we're gonna vote, okay, on all of this. So we have one more now. I'm gonna, wait, I have one more. Yes. Loud, please, because I'm in the back.
I like this one the best.
Okay.
And the main reason why is your fourth bullet point down, better perform.
Okay, gotcha.
And while being an architect, I lean toward user adoption as my #1 North Star. And if I can speed up a data entry where users perceive that a record save is faster one way versus another,
Right.
I will take that as a win. Because in a lot of places, still Salesforce is not liked by end users.
I gotcha.
And anything that we can do to make it
Faster.
easier, usability improves, then I'm going to go for it. I'm going to lean toward that and endure the cons.
There you go. We just talked about trade-offs. With every one of these, there are trade-offs.
Yeah.
And so one of the considerations is the amount of data and the complexity of your org. And for some, like in the two orgs that I work with, that little bit of speed isn't as important because I don't have huge quantities of data. But if you did, then you might need to go this way because that little incremental, it's minutia, but it might make a huge difference when you add it up. So that's why there is no one single, this is the way you do it, okay? And that's kind of the lesson here, is that at the beginning I said, everyone has a methodology for their particular situation. So now I'm going to show you mine and how I led to mine, which we already gave a little hint earlier, which is good, is that on that automation guide we first saw, they had some takeaways. And I read through all the documentation. I've been using Flow since you had to install Flow on your desktop computer. That was free Flow, which was a very different animal. But so I'm an early adopter, obviously. And I was right in there with Process Builder. I'm telling you, I did a session at Dreamforce, process automation makeover, switch everything to Process Builder. So, I put some thought into this and I built a lot of flows. And so I took these takeaways and this is what I came up with and this is what I do. So here's my philosophy. And you can't see it on the top, but it's as few flows as possible. You can't read it, but basically my methodology is always one before, one after per object. Always, that's just the baseline. I use flow templates. So every single time I create a flow, they're identical in the beginning of the flow. So I always have my bypasses built into my flows, and I always have an is new built into my flow. So I could do one flow, create an update. If I need to delete, that's another flow, but create an update, one flow per object, one before, one after. And then I use subflows when I can do it globally. And there's a lot of creative ways to do things globally to not have to do per object. And when I have, here's my criteria. If I really need something to fire before my before save or before my after, I do a separate flow so I can control the order. if I have a complex process, especially if I have a lot of actions. If you have a lot of email actions, you may not want that in the same flow because that way you can turn that off if you need to. And trust me, there are times emails get triggered based on certain data and you know the data is bad or you know it's going to be bad. You don't want your clients getting 500 emails going out when you don't want them to. So with my bypass, I can do that by putting that in a separate flow. And I do a lot of accounting in my orgs. And so I sometimes have some formulas and those can get a bit much. So I might put that in a separate flow, but I always start one before, one after, and try and get the basics done with those. And then only go to adding more when there's a reason. And let me give you some methodology behind the reason. Well, first, let's just stop with this. If you want to do create and update, so you don't need a separate flow for one before save, create, one before save, update. You can do it all in one by just having a little decision. And then I can treat my new records differently from my update records. So really simple, easy to do. And yes, there's a sacrifice because I'm using a decision element instead of criteria, entry criteria. So yes, I've made that decision to make that sacrifice. Okay. So there was, and then you can't see the whole thing, but Alex Petey put, back when I was doing Process Builder, I mentioned I was in the Process Builder for a while. He put this article on Medium, which I thought was really, really interesting and insightful. And he talked about the different types of processes and how I was aware at Process Builder that was going to get out of hand with process. So I was building my processes using his methodology of using initiator process. So when a new record, I had a separate process for new records. And then for the life cycle of an object, this is a big one. This is one reason why sometimes I'll definitely have a separate flow for life cycle. If the life cycle of an object in the different stages, especially opportunity or something like that, and you're going to do something different for every life cycle, that's a great use to have a separate flow so you could see it and really understand it and have your decisions marked out of each different stage in the life cycle and do different things. So it's super clear. That would be a use case to have a separate flow. And so I use kind of this thing, and then he has this ad hoc or random actions. That's kind of my before, my after that I create for each object. That's usually the random ad hoc type stuff. And for many of my objects, I mean, unless you're talking account or one of the big objects, you really can get by usually with one before and one after, you know, most times. And you start there, right? Because I said you never know when you're going to have to refactor. Things change, life changes. We all know how that happens. So you start there knowing that you may need something else. And he talks about sub-processes. And again, I decided on my methodology. For me, the choice was to only use those when I can do them globally. And I try to build them globally. What some people would build as separate sub-processes, I usually find a way to do it globally. So I do have pros, and I know there's more cons. I ran out of room. So this is my methodology. And I'd like to talk about that as few flows per object as possible. That sounds simple, right? And also my methodology is using bypasses on all flows. I never build a flow without a bypass. A bypass for the user to be able to lock a certain user out of triggering a flow, to lock a certain flow, just one flow at a time, to go by object or to go globally. Okay, so let's open the discussion. We can talk about mine, we can talk about yours, because I'm sure some people are doing something out here that I haven't seen before.
One additional thing, and I am 10,000% on board, and I've been preaching it myself. The templates with the bypass and everything else like that, you don't do it without. But one of the other things that I've done for some of my clients is adding feature flags. Work much the same way, but you can turn features on and off. So one of the clients had, they were calling Experian to get credit rating. It's like, well, we might want to turn that off, and we actually did have to turn it off because they put it in, and then they got to tell the business that, hey, this is going to happen, and we're going to block you from proceeding past stage 2 until you basically have credit rating.
Mm-hmm.
And so they decide, okay, we got to go and turn it off. Well, what do we do? We have to go back.
Yep.
The opportunity still runs, everything else still runs, that one feature doesn't stop.
Yep.
So much the same thing, but a little bit more granular.
I go down to each flow, but if I had a use case for that, I would definitely go that way. Yeah, I haven't had that use case yet.
General approaches, flow, entry point of record type with a couple other conditions. So that gives the ability to go here, admin, go do the work, and these are very specific things. Any Apex actions that are fire and forget, we actually offload those to a platform event so that at the end of the flow, they can create the platform event. It runs asynchronous, it's kind of fire and forget on that. We tend to avoid invocable Apex. XYZ reasons on that, but that's basically it's a flow with strong entry points. Any fire and forget, or we do that for logging because we have a couple things that are.
Do you have record types on all your objects?
For about 2.
Okay,
Yeah,
see, I've worked with orgs that have no record
Yeah.
types, so
But it's
believe it or not. Yeah.
and anything that we have that is either long processing, outbound calls. I have to look at it, but we try to we use platform events kind of our own little way because they're asynchronous and we kind of go, all right, go do that. But that's helped us lower limits because of some old code that's still doing some stuff on
We
it.
didn't mention that, but I do use async in my 2 flows sometimes when necessary. So, so that's still an option, even with, and it's almost like not a flow, kind of in a way, it's firing at a different time. So, any other that is but your methodology, again, you have a good team, you have all of these things in place. All of us may not have that
We've
luxury.
seen it great, put it that way. We know it was like,
Yes,
we need
yes,
to do this a
yes.
certain way.
And
because it breaks.
That is the best way to learn, is to break stuff. And hopefully not production. I mean, I tried to break it in my dev org, but I've broken production before. To be honest, I don't know if anybody could say, I mean, there's probably some people that have never, ever broken production, ever.
Are you trying if you haven't broken production?
There you go. All right, so any other thoughts? Any other way that you can think of doing it? Any other design? There have to be other designs that I haven't even touched here. No?
I wouldn't say it was the best, but I have seen it like a combination of code and
Right,
Not
you're
where-
100% right.
the flow is essentially like the handler, and then it just calls different invocable apex. So
Right.
then like the
His
decision
first choice to see is Wicked. Their second choice is Phantom of the Opera.
In a lot of, there's
Have
a
you ever
lot
seen Phantom of the Opera?
with the right
Me neither.
team. That way the admins can still play a little bit, but they don't, yeah. Anything else?
I wonder
But
if
since
that's,
I'm not a developer, I didn't bring that up because I don't know enough about it.
I wonder if that's a pattern we'll start to see more, is flows, invocable apex, because as we go forward with flows and Salesforce pushing more and more,
Right.
and there's more you can do with it,
Mm-hmm.
less need for apex, but there's still a need.
Yes.
So that combination of, I can do this much in flow, but this is getting a little too complicated. So I want to use Apex, but I don't want to change my whole flow to Apex. Or I never want to, I don't want a situation where I don't use a flow just because it's already in Apex.
Well,
Like
that's
that.
great.
That combination
We
of
follow that
compliments of
pattern.
both.
Yeah, you do.
Basically,
Okay.
the way we do is a mix of all what you have seen.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. That's what I'm.
We are
I
a
think that's what-
developer heavy and.
So
we have
you
lot
guys
of
know
data.
exactly, right.
Yeah, so we have multiple flows per object, like using the flow
Right.
explorer, we order them. Anything simple assignment goes into before say flow.
Right,
Fast
that's
food
what I
Apex.
do.
Anything complex business logic, we move to Apex. Apex before,
Okay, before the
as I said, we
application.
are developer heavy.
Exactly,
So
the
we
team
keep all the
matters.
simple stuff to admins, let them do all the assignments.
Right,
Anything that involves a lot of business logic goes to Apex.
That makes sense. And also, anybody who uses unofficial SF and you use any of those components, you are using, and I use a lot of those components, so I am using code.
We end up using flows because I can sit in front of a VA and a project manager and say, okay, let's diagram this out, what you're trying to do.
Right.
And it was a very specific tool that we gave them to say, okay, here's how this works, so that when they're building the requirements, they're thinking in that language.
Mhm.
And then don't worry about what the man's behind the curtain is doing.
Right.
It's very similar to what you're saying.
Yeah, and then it could turn into Apex, but they don't even know. Right, I gotcha. That's good. Do we have anybody online that has ideas?
No, they're all agreeing with.
Yeah.
Everybody would like your links for Apex hours for the other things that we're talking about, custom metadata. 'Cause I've seen your videos.
Yeah, the Florida Dreaming, I have ready to go up. It hasn't gone up yet, but I put on my YouTube page. Actually, I have a link here. Hold on.
If you share your link with me, I'll put it on the meeting planner.
Here it is.
Awesome. And
There it is.
I'll be honest, I found Monica on YouTube when I was learning flows about 2 years ago. And then I stalked her to find all of her other content because I really like her approach and the way her brain works. Then I actually saw you Florida Dreaming, and then I reached out to her and talked here. So I actually stalked you for a while. I'm sure other people have.
That's all. I stalked you because what Marlene did before Salesforce did it was she created the order of operations chart in a visual form. And then Salesforce saw how big that was going and they had to do it themselves because Marlene did it first and I saw that on LinkedIn and reached out to you. But also I'm thrilled to be here because I'm a University of Central Florida grad. So I am from the area.
Thank you for sharing your link. That's awesome. I want to share one thing. So yesterday I asked one of our developers to load a screen flow to create cases, and they had done the assignment inside the flow. But I asked them to remove that out because we have case assignment rules. So in my logic, my brain said all assignments should happen in case assignment rules. Flows don't fire case assignment rules. And
Right.
so we did an invocable Apex action to actually fire them, right? But still, all the assignment is happening in case assignment rules because that way it's one place centralized. But just keep in mind, flows, maybe they can't do something. You don't have to go always to code. We did code to fire off the assignment rules. And I didn't split where all that logic lives, right? Because I do like to minimize where things live. Also, Luke Freeland has done a whole bunch of free benchmarking for flows. He heavily recommends using the order triggers because if you have 5 flows that are not numbered and 5 that are numbered, even though they have the exact same logic, the ones that are numbered will execute faster.
Right.
And so it's just something that Salesforce has done under the covers, right? They will run your flows in the order that you requested and run much faster, use less resources. So definitely, all these little things.
Yeah, even if you have 3, put them in order. I usually do that.
And I have
Another tip I
millions of
got with the order of execution is don't use 1, 2, 3s, but use 10, 20.
Oh, yes.
Because if you want to insert a flow in the middle, you can use that middle numbers.
That's again thinking for the future and not
That's a tip I
thinking
got from
for
Benefits
today.
Podcast.
Right.
A couple minutes left, and then we're gonna switch over to.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's nothing else, so we can move
To kind
on.
of work off of what Marlene was saying, if you're an industry cloud, there's a thing called Business Rule Engine that just came out. And that will help you not have to go to Apex. So it's, I think it looks like it's like Velocity type based app, and you create business rules right there in that app. And it has a couple special tables, the 2, 3 special tables that it bases your, basically looks like a flow. And it uses these 3 tables. 2, it's got a lookup table and then and some other type of table. But it does that so that you can call it from flow. So your business logic starts to get complex. You put the logic into an object, and then you call it from an action.
Yeah, and that's another reason. Yeah, metadata is a good tool as well. All right.
Did you want to do the
So we just need another computer up here.
Did you want to do the vote?
Oh, what was the vote?
You were gonna ask people what pattern they prefer.
Oh, yeah, let's do it. Okay. I don't have a slide or anything for it. So, all right. Let's see. The people here can put their hands up, and then we can do it online, a virtual hand up. So let's go back to the beginning here, and let's see which of the patterns you prefer after seeing everything we talked about? Okay, so we have a total of 4 patterns here. I'm going to throw mine in the mix too. So let's start with how many people think for their org. Now, we're not saying that they think one's right or wrong, because that's not the decision. The decision is for the org that you're working in, is one flow per object right for you? Okay, in person, I'm not seeing a hand up. How about online? Any hands up for one? Okay, well, the vote originally was a little different. That's interesting. Maybe we should change some minds. Okay, how many people like the one flow with the subflows, the trigger handler class pattern? How many people for their org, that's the right pattern? In person, I don't have any hands. I have a maybe. I have one maybe. Anyone online?
Nobody yet?
Interesting. Okay, I think it's going to be between 2, or no one likes any of the ones we showed today. And then I'm going to say, well, who's presenting next week to show us theirs? Multiple flows per object. The Salesforce, however many flows you need, build them. Oh, we got quite a few hands here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I got a maybe 12. Okay, that's pretty good. 12 here.
I see 2 online.
And 2 online, 2, 3 for the multiple flows. But all right, and if you have really good methodology and design patterns, that can work for you as long as you're very, very careful. All right, how many people think as few flows as possible? Okay, a few. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 or 7 here in person. We got a couple maybes. How many online?
I see 1 so far.
Okay.
And I will say too, I mean, I kind of gravitate more towards 1 per object, but 1 per object per IO type. So, or sort of your before, or 1 per object for the before, 1 per object for the after.
That's closer to mine, yeah, because theirs is just 1 after.
But I kind of gravitate to 1 per type.
Yep.
Yeah. So yes, it was kind of okay, which one do you really go to? But it's really that one, so you basically have a before and you're after. So that's kind of where I draw them along. But yours is closer to that.
Yeah, so there is no one answer. There is no one size fits all. And whichever one, just be aware of the trade-offs and how you have to design those and to have a good methodology and to make sure you have your entry criteria if you're going that way. And really good rock solid naming convention is another thing if you're going to have lots of flows. All right. I do have one of my videos on naming convention on the YouTube channel. All right. It was great being here. Thank you so much. And good night. All right. We can bring up another